All right, let's try this again. Hey, everybody, it's Miyanovich. Welcome to the 2022 Sociology of Guns lecture on the human-weapon relationship. This lecture is something that I just completed for David Yamane at his course at Wake Forest. Always grateful to get that opportunity. And here it is that I'm laying it down for you guys so that you can hear what we have going on at David's course. It's important to note here that this lecture is for college students. It's not necessarily geared towards the average gun owner, although once we get to the point where we're talking about weapons anthropology, I think many of you will find it compelling. There are a number of things that I need to cover first, as this is designed for people that are new to guns or gun curious or who are open-minded and taking this course, but they don't know very much. I will be introducing some concepts from my own personal life. We will talk about the liberal gun owner's mission. We will talk about social psychology and human cognition. We will talk about all of that because it's essential to set all of that up before we get into the human-weapon relationship and weapons anthropology. Now, all of you should be looking at the screen right now. And by the way, if you're listening to this on the podcast, you definitely need to be watching the video version of this because you're not going to be able to understand what's going on unless you are looking at the screen at what's happening with the presentation. So this is a magazine cover that you're looking at from the magazine called Health, Wealth, and Wisdom. That was a magazine published by a friend of mine in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he asked myself, my wife, and my oldest daughter at the time, she was a little nubby, my friend asked us to be on the cover. And that's because my wife was a professional yoga instructor, and I was, in addition to being a professional green builder, I was a Tai Chi instructor and meditation instructor and Qigong instructor. Excuse me. So wellness and peace and holistic living and caring about the environment and caring about the people of the world has been principal to what I've been doing my whole adult life. And there are myths out there that are perpetuated by superficial understanding in society. And one of those myths is that you can't possibly combine being a moral person or a compassionate person or a person that aspires to be more empathetic or compassionate or moral. A person that aspires to be in a world that doesn't have the kind of conflict that we have or violence, that you can't possibly be that kind of person and engage in armed self-defense. It's entirely bullshit. See the Liberal Gun Owner's Lens episodes with Rabbi Hillel Nori for more on that. When this picture was taken, I had a concealed carry permit, was carrying a pistol, and had a shotgun at home. I had moved into a more troubled part of Pittsburgh to try to help the world out a little bit. Urban pioneering, a weed and cedar, as they say. And this is prior to meeting my wife. And was in that area doing that kind of work when I met my wife. And we ended up becoming married and having a child in short order and then had another child. But we were living in this area of town. And anyone who has done any urban pioneering or weed and seeding can tell you that when you move into an area of town like that and you try to help out, things get better for a while. Then they get worse, then they get better, then they get worse. There's a lot of up and down. So violence was a regular thing. Well, in the beginning, when my wife and I were there and I was first there, it really was a good time. It was a good era. But after that, things got a little bit hairy and a little bit more of the old violence was happening. And so that's when we had a baby and I was concerned for our safety. We didn't quite have enough money to move out yet. logistics were in the way, so I involved myself in purchasing arms. I had shot when I was a kid. I was involved with firearms when I was a kid up until I was about 16, and then I stepped away from that. And that's going to be the subject matter for an entire episode on the LGO Lens podcast. But I had a long time off from guns, and it was my concern for kith and kin that drove me to re-engage arms. And this is a common theme. It's not just a common theme in the gun culture, which it is, but it's certainly common amongst many liberals who find their way to guns and armed self-defense. So this idea that you can't possibly be someone who cares in the typical snowflake sense, which I definitely do, and also be involved in armed self-defense. Well, that idea is entirely bullshit, and it's a product of superficial people. Let's talk about the liberal gun owner's mission. Simultaneous proponency. I've got a few pedantic people have tried to bang me out over the word proponency, but kind of typical to people who do fast takes and have higher IQs. They didn't really spend any time looking into the word. So I chose the word on purpose. It's multi-layered, its meaning in terms of the mission. Proponency is archaic, sort of an archaic version of advocacy. And that's part of the meaning, is an archaic take on advocacy. But it's really about what a proponency is for the United States Army or in the engineering world, where a proponency is an office or an entity that's set up to address a specific issue. So in that sense, it's kind of a synonym for office. So it fits both for us. I really liked it. Creative. It has impact. It makes people go, what? So all of those things are positive, and that's what the proponency means. So here's this idea in society, which is entirely a product of our 20th century superficial political reality, that firearms ownership rights and public safety are rival concepts. They are not rival concepts. This is the result of having a society filled with inferior minds, in my opinion. And when you have a society filled with inferior minds, you have inferior results. And so these two things are not rival concepts. It's tricky. It's contentious. It always has been for humans, this thing with humans and violence and weapons. But it's a myth that you can't equally care for both. And I think only the person that understands the true value of both can have the kind of vision that can lead the future. And that's a future, frankly, that's better for the Second Amendment. It certainly is also better for the results that we can have against firearms-related injury and death. And this isn't a matter of discussion. It's a matter of, I'm going to show you. I already have tested the ideas out and know that they're going to work. And so I'm not really waiting on society or anybody else. Leaders lead. I've fallen into the position of being the leader here, and I'm just going to show people what it looks like. I'm not interested in having discussions. The FOPS nexus is the firearms ownership public safety nexus, and it sounds silly. FOPS sounds like the name of a Muppet or something, but the FOPS nexus makes it easier to refer to it. So that's our business, is the FOPS nexus, and not treating these concepts as rival concepts. They're not. How do you do it? Simple. There's guns and gun-related negatives, and you think and you do. We are going to think and analyze and understand to a higher degree than 99% of the people on the planet. And then we're going to do things directly in terms of guns, just guns, gun rights, gun ownership. We're going to do things directly for gun ownership, mostly inside of our own culture. We're going to make a better soil for people left of center in America to involve themselves with firearms. And that's going to raise things up or move things in the proper direction. Gun-related negatives are the same thing. Analyze, understand, research, publish, contribute towards the mitigation of issues. And it really is that simple. And I have proof of concept for almost all of these ideas. I tested all these ideas out kind of in secret. And so I wouldn't be here if I didn't know that this was going to work. And it is. It's going to work. So firearms ownership. This is what we do. Just a few things that we do. We support firearms ownership by the creation and maintenance of our own think tank to research, analyze, and publish information related to firearms as a phenomenon and firearms ownership as a right. Part of that is we have a larger goal of having a strong jurisprudential policy and regulation aspect to what we do. But doing that properly takes a lot of money and the right people. And so we're going to take our time to get both of those things. And we will be dealing with, in an unprecedented fashion or a very strong fashion, the regulatory aspect. For right now, our concentration is on the cultural aspect. And that's very important for our foundation. 2, by creating and maintaining a solid community of liberals who can participate in and contribute to the future of firearms ownership in America. 3, by creating, maintaining, and supporting unique and contemporary firearms training events in proprietary hubs within the United States. That has already started, and that is just a complement. That is just a complement to what the Liberal Gun Club is doing. The Liberal Gun Club is the main source in the United States for this training reality. They have a curriculum, they have chapters, they have instructors, they have training. They have that, and people that are liberal that own guns need to help the LGC to establish that as the prime mechanism for the first basic interface to guns for liberals in America. We are doing something that's complementary and more specialized. We're not going to be creating hubs all over the place that can train all the liberals in the world and America with the guns, and that's not happening. The Liberal Gun Club has that taken care of. I have to go back. There we go. Sorry. 4 is by creating, maintaining, and supporting unique and innovative firearms organizations and businesses who align with our principles and the principle of social sensitivity, 21st century thinking, as I call it. Organizations like the LGC, like Walk the Talk America, like the Safe and Secure Project, etc., etc. People that and organizations and entities that have a needle that's a little bit more towards simultaneous proponency and having a more mature 21st century mentality relative to the FOPS nexus. Public safety. Be aware, learn, analyze, act. That's how the think tank works. It applies to both firearms ownership and public safety, but we categorize and prioritize these 8 negative phenomena as they relate to firearms-related injury and death. 1, general homicide. 2, suicide. 3, mass shootings. That's split into school shootings, houses of worship, and general public. 4, domestic violence. 5, xenophobic violence. That's the general definition of xenophobic. Violence against that which is foreign. So all those that are in my group that perhaps look like me, think like me, talk like me, believe like I do, we're the angels, and all the people on the outside of our circle are the devils. That's a principal component of xenophobic people. It also describes an enormous amount of people that are in the American gun-owning reality. And that, of course, the violence from those types of people can translate into violence against communities of color, LGBTQ+, etc. 6, color on color violence, internecine violence in communities of color. 7, law enforcement misconduct. And 8, accidents. So 7, law enforcement misconduct is police misconduct shootings. I did not make all of these 8 categories up. They're categories that are in existence. I framed them a certain way, and they are certainly, after 10 years and tens of thousands of conversations that I've observed in our Facebook group, that these are the subjects where when people are talking about gun-related negatives, this is where people land. And so we are going to address these by having a subject matter expert for each of the 8 categories, at least one subject matter expert, to help us to analyze and publish regularly on these categories. And then we are going to have one organization, at least from each of the 8 categories, that are and in which this organization is going to be directly or is in the business of directly impacting or mitigating these issues. And we are going to donate to those people and give them resources. So, the firearms ownership public safety finger lock, the FOPS finger lock. On one side, you have firearms ownership. The other side, you have public safety. There is a lock there because people are engaged in primitive or primal 20th century superficial understanding. One side you have, if you don't pass the assault weapons ban, you don't care about the kids. The other side is guns are hermetically sealed off from all other things in the universe. They're not connected to anything in society, and you can't treat them that way. We don't live in a fabric of intersecting rights. Gun rights is the right that matters, from my cold dead hands. Hey, both of those things just persist. They persist everywhere. And many people, they don't persist. The many gun owners actually don't believe in those things, but it's the most vocal and most motivated people that have a tendency to believe in the more extreme take on it, and it drives the finger lock. So our hypothesis here is that that's all bullshit. We're just going to go downstream and model and show what it looks like when somebody doesn't do that. And the rest of that type of thinking belongs buried in the past. Why? Why does the finger lock happen? Well, Kahan and Brahman, cultural cognition. Kahan and Brahman are two legal scholars, George Washington University. They have some very salient ideas and papers, particularly on guns. Let's read this quote from Kahan and Brahman. Culture is prior to facts in human cognition. Through an overlapping set of psychological and social mechanisms, individuals adopt the factual beliefs that are dominant among persons who share their cultural orientations. Far from being updated in light of new evidence, beliefs so formed operate as an evidentiary filter, inducing individuals to dismiss any contrary evidence as unreliable, particularly when that evidence is proffered by individuals of an opposing cultural affiliation. This perfectly describes what's happening in our society, particularly with all of the polarization across the board. And this is because we have a society full of fucking numpties. And that's that. It might be principle and tribal to think this way, but not being able to recognize after a couple of years that that's what's happening is the result of morons, is the result of 20th century thinking, or thinking that doesn't belong anymore. And it doesn't belong the hypothesis is if you want better results at the FOBS nexus, you have to stop doing this, right? If your ideas are only, or the people that proffer ideas that look like you and sound like you and believe like you do, and those are all the good ideas, but all the ideas that come from people that don't look like you or don't live like you, those are all the devil's ideas. If that's the way you're going to roll, then it's not just bad for public safety, it's bad for 2A. It's bad for everything. So that's cultural cognition. It's echo chamber identification over facts. Jonathan Haidt's Rider and the Elephant. Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, social cognitive social scientist. You definitely need to check out The Righteous Mind if you want to live in a better world, in my opinion. But so Haidt says, the mind divided is like a rider on an elephant, and the rider's job is to serve the elephant. The rider is our conscious reasoning, the stream of words and images of which we are fully aware. The elephant is the other 99% of mental processes, the ones that occur outside of awareness, but that actually govern most of our behavior. So Haidt says 1% of what's in your brain you can be aware of, basically, or in control of. George Lakoff from Berkeley says that it's 2%. But the reality is much of what drives us as beings is coming from some other place inside of our mind that we're not aware of or not in control of. An excellent point, an accurate point. And the best example of this is, have you ever been in a relationship where once you finally got out of it, you were like, what the fuck was I thinking? Why was I with that person? That was the biggest waste of my time. What was I thinking? I must have been out of my mind. Well, that's because Your rider was weak and your elephant took over. And hormones and neurochemicals and impulses and lies from your own mind and deception from your own mind and lies from your own heart all served the elephant and pushed things forward. And your rider was weak. Not fully understanding even the drives that were driving you to be in the relationship or keeping it going until way later. That's because we are driven by the elephant. And that's part of our problem with understanding guns or public safety or making the whole thing better. So this moves us into understanding proximate and ultimate reasoning. There are two levels to this. One is the scholarly intellectual level, and the other is the general existential level. Proximate reasoning assigns value or meaning to a phenomenon based upon the current reality in the local environment. Ultimate reasoning assigns value or meaning to a phenomenon based upon the total historic picture, including origin. By the way, I should mention with the rider and the elephant, if you want to understand guns and the human-weapon relationship, you have to understand that it's rooted in the elephant. It's not in the rider. It's not out in the gun dork librarian part of the prefrontal cortex where you like guns and collecting and the mechanisms, and you like marksmanship and making the bullets go closer. And that's all in the dork part of the brain, the rider, the prefrontal cortex. This stuff with humans and guns and humans and weapons is deep inside of the elephant realm. So this is why we need to understand proximate and ultimate reasoning. Now, in the intellectual scholarly sense, David Yamane's work represents proximate reasoning. He's taking a fair take of it all right about now, contemporary reality, a little bit before, a little bit after, taking a good look at it. And that proximate lens is very important. The ultimate reasoning is represented by the work of people like Curtis Marion and John J. Shea, particularly Dr. Shea, who says that weapons are a human cultural universal. Projectiles are. And that ultimate reasoning is represented by me, Miyanovich. So David is looking at the now, and I started asking the question about, well, how far back does this thing go, right? And the reality is it doesn't go back to Chinese gunpowder and handcrafted European rifle stocks. We have an unbroken relationship with projectile weaponry and weaponry in general that goes all the way back to the emergence of our species. So it never goes away. It's always with us, and we're always pursuing it. And the reality is that guns were pushed by the weapon systems that were coming before it, and those systems were pushed by the weapon systems that were coming before it. When you look at this thing anthropologically, this is why comprehensive understanding is important and ultimate understanding is important. Ultimate reasoning is important, because if you just stick with it in terms of the proximate lens, you can get stuck, right? And so understanding this deal is a part of making things better at the FOBS nexus and in society. If we just keep thinking that this guns thing is about Jesus and George Washington and Eagles and Ted Nugent, okay, well, that's not helping us. It's bullshit. So we need to be able to engage in the ultimate reasoning. So David represents the contemporary, right, in the scholarly sense, and then I'm representing the ultimate, right, the anthropologic relationship with weaponry that goes all the way back to our emergence as a species, and David is looking at the right now. Now, our brains are made up of pattern recognizers, about 300 plus of them, and then they're like little cameras that look for this or that, A or B. So duality. So those pattern recognizers are going to perceive things and take in information based on A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, and then put all these things together so you get a quick take. Because quick takes help humans, right? So we have a proximate lens on things. We're always kind of looking at the now, making the now the center of the universe, the nexus of our understanding. The issue with that is that does us well. There's no way we could sit around and consider every single thing that was going to happen based on every single phenomenon every single day. It works great for things like when we were in the savannah back in the day and there was some beastie that was chasing us. Are we going to turn around and go, oh, look at that. Look at the pelt. I wonder what that pelt is so shimmery. That fur is so shimmery. I wonder, is that a yellow? Was that? Look at the shoulder shape on that saber-toothy thing. Boy, I wonder what the angle is on the humerus bone. Like if we were doing that, we'd be dead. So quick takes are kind of principal to our survival. However, in a complex society in the 21st century, I think we're seeing currently that quick takes they have to be one of the worst fucking things that can possibly happen. So with guns and with society, this proximate tendency in our brain is really screwing us. And it's screwing over better results in guns, I would argue. And some people would say, yeah, but we just had, may issues out the door and shall issue and all of that stuff. Well, there are gains on one side and gains on the other, but the reality is it's still sticky, and there's still a Chinese finger lock or a FOPS finger lock, and we could be further ahead for sure. But sticking with proximate reasoning all the time is imprisoning us, and it's hurting society currently. Very important as we move forward for the human-weapon relationship, because most people who own guns think about guns through the lens of a hobby, and that's approximate reasoning. The ultimate reasoning for guns is the ultimate reasoning for projectiles, which is the acquisition of animal protein, which we don't necessarily do as much anymore. But it's the expression of interpersonal violence, offensive or defensive, and it's also in a majorly complex equation of social coercion that we're going to talk about later on. But the ultimate reasoning for guns is not for people to have fun and have relief. It's not for selling gear and stuff. It's about something deeper. So this is coffee car person or coffee car passenger. The person driving this car is going 70. All the other cars are going 70. It's snowing out. Potentially there could be ice. There are people driving in the opposite direction that are 4 feet to the left of this car's window that are also going 70. A bunch of 70-mile-an-hour missiles driving around, and it's cold and there could be ice. Coffee car passenger is trying to turn this car into the living room, which is what humans do and the human mind, which is all well and good. We can't possibly not have denial inside of our mind, or else we wouldn't be able to do a lot of things. Denying the outside reality there is okay sometimes, I think. But let's imagine this scenario, which is that there's a car 5 cars ahead of this car that has to lock the brakes up. Then the car behind that has to lock them up. The car behind that has to lock them up. And it goes all the way back to this car. And the driver of this car has to lock them up to save from a fender bender and a crash. So the driver does that. When the driver locks the brakes up a little bit, coffee car person, their cup goes jangly and almost spills the Starbucks, right? And then the smartphone comes flying out of their hand, and their feet are up on the dashboard, which is completely moronic. But the feet smash and hit into the window a little bit. They don't smash the window, but they hit into the window, which would be all well and good if coffee car domestic couch person who's trying to turn the 70-mile-an-hour missile into their living room, if they just did that and then went, oh, God, no, thank God that didn't end up badly. Let's imagine that person doesn't do that, but does what humans typically do or will do in situations like this, where they turn to the driver and berate the driver. Like, I almost spilled my coffee. What are you doing? I was on my phone, and I just smashed my foot. Can't you take it easy? Pay attention, or whatever. So this is an analogy of typically how human minds work, or they work this way many times. So not only does coffee car person want to turn the car into the fucking living room, they want to blame the person who's in charge of the ultimate reality for reacting properly and saving everyone's life, or not having things be super fucked up. Because coffee car person has a 4-walled, insulated mentality and is trying to take everything in life and turn it into that. Things that where the coffee car person doesn't have to look at the ultimate reality, doesn't have to look at the difficult things, doesn't have to really deal with the difficult things. So they're trying to turn everything into something that they can easily be comforted all the time. And then perhaps if they look at the difficult things, they can wave their finger from inside of this insulated reality and be somewhat inaccurate and not know what they're talking about, because their whole mentality is about basically checking out of the harder part of existence and trying to have a comforting existence all the time. This is the coffee car person psychology, and we have an entire society that is attempting to be this now. Coffee car person, right? And certainly a vast amount of progressives and Democrats think this way and endeavor to be this way. They want the whole of existence to be a college campus, and that's just not how that works. So coffee car person is very, very important as we move forward, because it describes the baseline of how a lot of people with no experience around firearms treat firearms, right? They want to be in their comforting world, and then when something gets shaken up, they want to go, "What the fuck are you doing? It's your fault," right? That's what coffee car Democrats and progressives do about guns. They point the finger at us. "You don't care about the kids. What are you doing?" Right? It's a lot more complex than that. And so very important to understand coffee car person. Another way to understand it, idealists. So this is idealist pool. It's a thing I've developed called idealist pool. All of the pockets that say SO, that means suboptimal outcome. Then there's a pocket that's MOO, more optimal outcome or most optimal outcome. This is the result of superficial understanding, because idealists are always running off of the fuel of superficial understanding. Idealists don't want to be bothered with actualities, with pragmatism. They just want to have single agent ideas and commitments to single agent ideas in terms of dealing with complex problems. And they believe everything in society is a no-brainer, and it's easy to do things and blame things just on whatever, the NRA, or even though there's a lot you can blame the NRA for. In terms of guns, it's always some sort of a simple idea like, if you don't ban the ARs, then you don't care about the kids. You just have to have an assault weapons ban, and then the insinuation is that school shootings are going to stop, which is bullshit. So idealist pool. Everyone or most people have been at a pool table, taken a pool ball, rubbed it on the felt a little bit, and then just shuttled it down into the pocket, just for fun, down in the corner pocket. If you don't get it on the first try, you usually get it on the second try. It's pretty easy. Doesn't take much. Human heuristics. Very easy to do. Notice there's no pool cue. There's no other players. There's no balls. There's nothing. There's no bank shots. There's no skill set. There's just heuristics, basic human capacity, and throw the ball down in the pocket, right? So it takes a superficial amount of effort and skill to do that, right? And that's what idealists believe, right? Like all of the socioeconomic problems that we have in the world, all we have to do is take the money from the billionaires and give it to the poor people. Okay. There's partial truth inside of that, but it's certainly not that easy. Idealist pool is how most people run. It's also how gun rights people run. Oftentimes patriots run on idealist pool, and they don't want to acknowledge the complexity of society. Reality-based pool is what LGO is into. It takes exceptional understanding. You can see now that there are balls on the table. There is a pool cue involved. There was a chalking of that pool cue. There is assumed here is there is an opponent, at least one, and you're playing a game. You have to make a bank shot. You have to know how that rail is going to play. You got to know the feel for that rail. There's pressure. There's one most or more optimal outcome, and you got to make the play. So this is reality-based pool. You see that rail up there is the sociocultural rail. And what a true sociocultural rail is, it's a multi-component substance inside of that rail rubber. It's the government, it's policy, it's law, it's the courts, it's the economic reality, it's innovation, it's social cognition. It's so many different things. It's local, it's grassroots, it's creativity, it's all kinds of components going into how that rubber is going to react. Now, liberals and Democrats, quote unquote liberals, anti-gun liberals, I don't consider them liberals, but the people that are voting and supporting gun control. Let's use this as an example. We have a highly dysfunctional government, but let's say it's kind of gridlocky like it was a couple years ago, like highly gridlocky. So at that time, that term, if you're going to only consider law and policy and regulation as your way to deal with problems, which a lot of people, lazy liberals and progressives and Democrats are like that. They believe you pass laws to deal with problems. It's snake oil. It's bullshit. It's not true. It's not that laws and regulations can't be used in an equation to deal with issues. But at the level of the simple, primitive understanding that people have of reality, they want just single agent, lazy solutions that they don't have to work very hard for. If you just say, well, pass the law and that's all we need to do, and then all the problems will go away and it's the NRA's fault. If you say shit like that, well, you're off the hook. You can just put your opinion in and then check out. You don't have to be involved and invest in any long-term solution. So these people that are like, just pass the laws. Well, what if you have a highly dysfunctional, gridlocked government and the only thing socioculturally that you are considering is government and laws? Well, that makes it a single agent, single component rail. And if that rail doesn't have any spring to it because it's dysfunctional, it's basically marble. So you have to make a bank shot and bank it off of marble. Okay, so you can't do that because the ball is going to hit off of the rail and it's going to stick, or it's going to bounce a little, or it's going to slide down the rail in the wrong direction. So the good thing is the sociocultural reality is never just government. It's never just policy. It's never just the courts. It's a bunch of different things. So if things aren't good with government, you have other things that you can use or that are present inside of that sociocultural rail that can help with the bank shot, right? That's very, very important to understand that. And if you have a better understanding of those other components, then you can be an effective player. But this shit with people that are on our side believing that laws are how you address gun problems primarily, these are people that are not playing reality-based pool. They don't have an exceptional understanding. They are using idealist pool, this game, which is bullshit. It's not real. We have arrived at the end of this section of the lecture. We will be moving into understanding human nature next, and we will be moving directly then into the human-weapon relationship. This was all an essential introduction and part of this presentation. Please hang out and hang on there for part 2 to this lecture that I used at the 2022 Sociology of Guns course with David Yamane. Thank you.